an hour in 2015, the legislators passed a so-called preemption law, which prevents municipalities from setting a minimum wage any higher than that of the state. Effective August 28th, St. Louis's poorest workers will get a pay cut of 23%. The state's Republican governor, Eric Greitens, didn't sign the law, but chose to allow it to become law anyway by not attempting to veto it. Wanda Rogers, a McDonald's fast food worker involved in the fight for 15 and a union, says that workers were struggling at $7.70 an hour.
$10 an hour, it made it a little easier for us. How can you give us some and then just come and snatch it back from us? McDonald's is $1 billion corporation. They can afford to pay us $15 an hour for real. We really do some hard work, and for y'all to come back and take this $10 from us, I don't think it's fair. I wonder if they can live off of $7.70 an hour. It's really going to be heartbreaking, and it's really going to hurt us for them to come back and just snatch that from under us like that. I'm not going to accept it. We're going to keep on fighting until we get what we deserve and what we work hard for.
The National Employment Law Project is calling out the so-called gig economy, app-based companies such as Uber, for contributing to racial inequality in our economy. Nayantara Mehta of NELP says a lot of the problems facing these workers stems from misclassifying them as independent contractors.
What a lot of these gig companies are doing is saying, we're going to dictate a lot of your working life and working conditions, but we're going to call you an independent contractor. All of the things that most of us associate with the protections of having a job, that we get paid a minimum wage or are protected from discrimination, we are able to collectively organize as workers. All of these things happen if you are classified as an employee.
Independent contractors are exempt from protections of the Civil Rights Act. In addition to direct discrimination, Mehta notes biases in the customer rating systems companies such as Uber use to rate their workers.
Whether they are explicitly biased or they have the invisible but pervasive biases that we know exist in our society, they apply those biases when they're rating their drivers. Drivers of color are therefore more likely to receive lower ratings. Our biggest concerns with the gig economy reflect our concerns with the economy in general, which is that workers are exploited, and the most vulnerable workers, often workers of color and immigrant workers and low-paid workers, are especially vulnerable. It's really important for us to hold these companies accountable to make sure that these companies don't get away with replicating the inequalities and discrimination that we see too often.
To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. First, foremost, it appears that Donald Trump's Leave No Lawyer Unemployed program in full swing. Look, it seems like every day a new scandal, a new shoe falling off the centipede with unlimited legs. And hopefully, look, as I've been saying for a while, hopefully the lawyers are asking for their retainers up front. You had Trump, he's got several lawyers You've got Pence. He's lawyered up. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, lawyered up. And then you go to the campaign. You got Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Carter Page, Roger Stone. You even got Kush Boy. He's lawyered up, Kushner. And now Junior. I guess it's all of them. It's so bad. Understand, it's so bad that even Trump's lawyers, like Michael Cohen, they're lawyering up. And, what's interesting is, while this may be good for the legal profession, lots of employment, lots of retainer time, lots of billable hours to fill the coffers. For us, this is terrible. I mean, because the rest of the world is looking at us like we're completely dysfunctional. And you look at, yesterday with Donald Jr. lawyering up with a mob lawyer. And I guess, this is the world that they live in. And the more you're looking at this whole scenario with him, taking this meeting with this Russian lawyer who he believed was peddling dirt on Hillary Clinton. So he took the meeting. Now this is what they've decided on now. This is today's story. Yesterday was a little different, day before a little different, but today it was set up by an intermediary, a friend, someone that they met doing the beauty pageants, a guy who was a tabloid reporter. So it's right down in the bottom of the muck where they're used to being. But the meeting was set up with the understanding that this Russian lawyer had dirt from the Kremlin. This is what they've admitted he went into the meeting thinking was there. And understand, this is what they went in thinking was there. Now, whether there was anything there or not, you could say, the timing's a little convenient. Obviously, the same day Donald Trump comes out and says, hey, we want those 1,000 emails. And kind of makes you wonder, how much of this. Now, will we get to the bottom of it? Hopefully, because there were 3 sources that have seen this email. And again, it's I go back to the beginning. You go back to the beginning of the Trump administration. Had he just shut his mouth, had he not taken this on and had the thin skin and just said, look, we're going to get to the bottom of whatever happened, but I'm the president now and we're going to move forward. We've got an agenda. We've got to pass health care reform. We've got to pass tax reform. We're going to do all of the things that Republicans want to do. Now, granted, I'm glad they haven't done it because it's horribly destructive for the country. But had he done that and not focused on the size of the crowds and on the election results and on the fact that he lost by 3 million votes and we're going to go find those 3 million people, had he just done that, I don't know. I don't believe you'd be here. But the deeper he digs, the more they double down, the more obviously the mainstream press is going to go, maybe we should be looking at this. Now, they should have done their job prior to the election, because I keep going back to the reality, for me, was at the conventions. The open, dirty secrets were already all of the ties with the Russians. I mean, it was an open secret at the conventions. So, it would have been nice had they done their job then so we wouldn't be in this mess now. But the thing that gets me is, we started off, there's nothing here. The right wing and left wing, saying, well, there's nothing here. There's no Russia here. And then it turned into, well, it's just Democrats making stuff up, just sour grapes, just those Hillary people who are sour grapes. Then it was, well, they were just innocent meetings. All campaigns do it. Wouldn't you? They all do it. It's just how it is. And now, it's, well, it's sleazy, but it's not criminal. And I'll go, yeah, sleazy is right, but criminal, I'm thinking maybe. Because as Richard Painter points out, had this happened during the Bush years, there'd be some people, detained, some people heavily questioned. Now, just think, that was just only a few short years ago. And as I was thinking last night, oh, how I pine for the days when a stain on a blue dress was an impeachable offense. If a stain on a blue dress is impeachable, what is this? So yesterday you had Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who, you give her credit. Give her credit. She goes out there. She toes the company line. I hope she will be rewarded. Well, I'm sure she's being rewarded handsomely. She said that the only thing I see inappropriate about the meeting was the people that leaked the information on the meeting after it was voluntarily disclosed. Here's the thing, Sarah. The reality is, and I'm sorry about this, if you saying that illegally exposing your illegal activity is wrong is not a defense. It's not a defense to say that it's illegal that our illegal activity was exposed. That's not a defense. Now, you see the fake news. You see all of these right-wing groups just piling on it. My email box was full today of it's not criminal. It's not illegal. What they did was, maybe it was the optics were off, but it's not criminal. And I'm going, maybe not for Donald Sr., but for Jr.? I mean, come on. Stop and think about it for a minute. Went in with the intent, and he's admitted to this, to the intent of the Kremlin has information, has dirt on Hillary Clinton. And I'm going to go into this meeting seeking dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Kremlin. Already that's too much. Now, you've got the Russian lawyer who says, well, she didn't have anything. So who's lying? And again, it comes back to this. This is stuff that used to get people thrown out of government. This is stuff that used to get people investigated. This is stuff that used to get people thrown in jail. You've admitted to doing something that is not right. And now you've got all of these pieces with all different stories. It's like a bad, I was having this conversation with my daughter last night, and I'm going, this is why you don't ever talk. Shut up. Stop. You have the right to remain silent. Use it. Now, from our perspective, as citizens wanting to know what our government is doing in this wonderful experiment of self-rule and self-governance, we have to hold people like Junior, like Senior, like Pence, like all of these. We need to hold these people accountable. We need to know when, why, how, what, and in our name, what are they getting away with? As I said from the very beginning, when this administration, when they look back at what this administration has done, it will be the largest heist in the history of civilization. This will be the biggest ripoff. And I think a good line for the headstone. Sleazy, but not illegal. That might be a good closing line. Scary, scary stuff. Lots to get to today. A big race out in Wisconsin's 1st Congressional District. Our good friend David Yankovich is stepping aside, going to be helping the Iron Stash to take out Paul Ryan. Look, this is the kind of unity, the kind of leadership, the kind of vision that we need to bring back a Democratic Party to fight back against what's going on. So we'll get some on that. Also, Andrea Chalupa is going to be here to give us some more on the Donald Jr., Russia, G20, Putin bit. And Celeste Drake going to be talking a little bit about just how horrible our free trade agreements are and this idea of neoliberal free trade. Maybe something we can get the Trump to actually do something positive on. Who knows? Not holding the breath, but who knows? Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
All of my life I've searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that the American Indian movement began at a meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A group of 200 Native Americans gathered together to discuss a response to the U.S. government's history of broken treaties and the devastating consequences on Native peoples. The statistics of unyielding poverty and high unemployment in Native communities were staggering. By 1970, 40% of the Native population lived in poverty. The unemployment rate was 10 times the national average. Life expectancy was only 44 years old. In the early 1970s, activists staged a series of occupations at Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, and at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is built on a site in the Black Hills that is sacred to the Oceti-Sakowin, or the Great Sioux Nation. The United States government promised Native rights to the land in a treaty that was broken when gold was discovered. In 1972, activists staged a Trail of Broken Treaties caravan, which ended in a 6-day occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Washington, D.C. They issued a statement that read, quote, "We seek a new American majority, a majority that is not content merely to confirm itself by superiority of numbers, but which conscience is committed toward prevailing upon the public will in ceasing wrongs and doing right." Beginning in the 1970s, the United States government began to respond to Native people's demands. A series of federal acts gave Native communities more control over their education and improving their health care. Lawsuits brought by tribes resulted in further economic autonomy. Yet by 2014, 1 in 4 Native people still lived in poverty. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left, rain shed upon red. Father, son, left to carry on, blue denim had his vein. Oh, he's a working class man.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So what we're seeing going on across the country are people lining up to say, look, we've got to take on the GOP. We've got to take on the people in Washington and in state capitals across the country because, look, the priorities completely misplaced. The ideas that we were going to talk about jobs, we were going to talk about rebuilding the middle class, a prosperous working class, it ain't happening. And it isn't happening, and it's not going to happen. So what's going to have to happen is average, everyday working class folks like you, me, and others are going to have to step forward, which is why I was one of the first people to say, hey, my good friend David Yankovich, let's get him to run against Paul Ryan, because I believe Paul Ryan is the ideological head of the Republican Party. He's the guy who brings all the bad ideas. So if you could take him out, so much better. So, I thought, the big news last week was David was stepping aside, going to team up with Randy Bryce and say, look, it's all about taking out Paul Ryan. It's not about dividing and tearing up the party. And this is the kind of unity, the kind of leadership that the Democratic Party is going to need to come together. And if we can see this kind of solidarity across the country, we might actually have a shot in 2018 at returning the nation just to some level of sanity, which is huge in my opinion, which is why we've asked both David and Randy to come talk with us. David, thanks for taking time for us. David, you there? I guess not. I've also got Randy Bryce on the line. Randy, are you there?
Hello? I'm here. I can hear David.
Okay. Well, for some reason, we're not getting David through. David, you there? I guess not. Anyway.
No, I don't hear him.
Yeah.
No, I don't hear him.
That's weird. I always a technical headache. But, the thing is, Randy, and thank you for taking a little time for us. What made you guys come together? What made, for a while you were butting heads and heads. What made you guys come together?
And, talking about button heads, I really don't think it wasn't a big thing. There wasn't a lot of headbutting. It wasn't very, it wasn't hard hits. And actually, we went out to eat the night before David announced his support for us. And we laughed about some of the things that we did, setting up little booby traps and that after each other. It was, we actually had a really good time when we ate. But it was just the fact that we're looking at the big picture, and we have similar stories talking about our concern for our families and people in the area, and it's just a desire to come together, and that it's I don't see this as David dropping out or losing in any way. He's he pulled up his roots. I have to give him all kinds of credit for having the desire, and the drive to pick up everything and move to a place he's never been to before, and plant himself firmly. So we were both at the Racine County Dems meeting last night. I told him that if we're going to get this done, we're going to work together. He needs to know all the same people I do. So it's about giving him the connections that, and meeting people that have helped me and that I've stood with for these past years, especially since Scott Walker and these extreme Republicans have taken over. So it's looking out for, and and it's an understanding too that Paul Ryan is the Speaker of the House. He's not the Speaker. He's not speaking on behalf of working people's houses. But it's just this is a national issue, and it's directly affecting people of First Congressional District because he's nowhere to be found as far as when it comes to talking to the public.
Yeah, and the reality is, Wisconsin for me has been ground zero. I remember back in 2011, we were one of the few radio programs in the country to broadcast from inside the Capitol there in Madison. Slept on the floor there, on the marble floor, for almost 2 weeks as that whole debacle was going on. And I remember saying then that all of the bad ideas that are coming out of Wisconsin in 2011 were going to find their way across the country because it was the GOP ideology. This was what they had been wanting for generations. It's just now that they had the funding and the mechanisms to push that stuff forward.
Right, and especially more so after this last November election with seeing who's in Washington, D.C., and that's, Rance Priebus is from Kenosha. Scott Walker was trying to get himself in, and now he's buddy with Donald Trump, and of course Paul Ryan. So it's everything that's been going on in Wisconsin has been exported to the rest of the country, and it's that was one of many reasons why I felt the need to get in and put a stop to this.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the video that you guys put out, probably one of the top 5 political videos I've seen, right up there with Ben Carson's Hands video. Not as high as the Morning in America with Reagan and the little girl with Johnson, but really way up there.
Yeah, and one of the things when I was given some links of work that the guys did, and that's Acres, New York, was look at stuff that they did, and it was all they did. Mayor de Blasio's ad, Fetterman for Senate. And it was all, storytelling. Like the de Blasio one was him sitting, eating breakfast with his family. And I'm so sick of, and I know a lot of other people are too, based on comments I'm getting, just really sick of the other, the attack ads where somebody pulls out a crate of vegetables and starts launching them at their opponent, saying, this guy's horrible, this guy's horrible. It told a story. It's a positive message. And I'd like to see, I would hope that more people would choose positive messages instead of attacks. There's too much ugliness going on in the country right now, and there's no need for it.
No, the hate and the anger is just ramping up to levels that I've never seen in my lifetime. And I understand we got David on line 1. David, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep. I appreciate you taking some time for us. David, I've been seeing a lot of messaging going on. A lot of folks saying that, look, you did the right thing. That this is the leadership. This is the kind of vision, the kind of idea of unity and solidarity that maybe we need to see across the country. And saying, it's not about tearing each other apart. It's about going after the real target, which in Wisconsin's 1st District is Paul Ryan.
Oh, absolutely. I got to know Randy really well, and we're Wisconsin. You run into each other a lot. We go to different events, and we see each other all the time. So me and Randy have had a lot of time to talk to each other, and I've gotten to know him. Our stories are very similar for the reasons why we got into this race. His mom and the issues that she's going through medically, and then, of course, the stuff that happened to mine that I talked about here before. And just getting to know him. I mean, this is a guy who he's worked hard. He's worked in the freezing cold. He's worked in a blistering heat. He's been there, and, he had that ad, and like what Randy just said, he didn't go negative. He didn't talk about Paul Ryan being a clown or any of that stuff. He told his own story, and it was powerful, and it resonated with everybody, and it resonated with me. So I wanted to help out as much as I could. And when I was thinking about this race in particular, when you put your pride aside, you think about it objectively. The best way to take out Paul Ryan is to come together. The fundraising, the unity, us on the same message. He's counting on a hotly contested, divisive primary that's going to hurt the Democrats. And, I removed that option. Now it's basically, going to be our story versus his. And his story is driving a Wienermobile, while Randy Bryce has been working hard his whole life. So I'm really excited about what we did. And I'm excited about coming together and doing this unified and really just hitting the road together on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that, look, at the end of it, the goal is coming up with, how do we regain that prosperous working class? How do we make sure that that families have the ability to put food on the table, health care, education, infrastructure? These are the policies. You go back to 2016 and why I believe, and maybe I'll get Randy's thought on this, because a lot of union members voted for Donald Trump because, look, the unions were saying bad trade deals, we need to rebuild the country, and that was Trump's message, yet we've gotten none of that out of this administration or out of Paul Ryan.
Donald Trump sounded good, and I have worked within the past year since the election with guys that I know have voted for him, and I asked them, has he done anything? Has he name one promise he's kept? And they just kind of hang their heads. And you're right, he hasn't. The message sounded good, and that's what I was telling our members back then. I was like, the message is good, but I can promise you. A trip to Disney World every other month, and you might want it, but that doesn't mean you're going to get it. And that's where this message is coming out now. I tell people I didn't invent the internet. That's not what the ad's about. It's just a working person with concerns about his son, his parents, his neighbor's health, and people just need to search on the internet to see where I've been and who I've been standing with, what I've done. I'm just stating, what I've done, and looking forward to continuing it. There's not going to be any change in who I am or what I'm about.
Now, the reality is this is going to be one of the most expensive elections, I would have to imagine, in the country, in that you're taking on the sitting Speaker of the House. An upset in this 1st congressional district in Wisconsin would be a major, major blow to the conservative ideology and all of the bad ideas that we see banging around.
Right, and already it's been a couple of weeks. When we were first discussing how we're going to run, we figured Paul Ryan and they were going to ignore us based on previous races. They were just going to ignore us and pretend we didn't exist for as long as they possibly could. The NRCC already sent out an ad across the country attacking me, calling me, left-wing agitator, and it's pretty humorous. I don't know if they think they're really hurting my feelings or something like that, but all I tell people is if they need to come work with me on a job site and to see how we, the good-natured ribbing that goes back and forth, and it's funny. I'm like, is this the best you have? So, and I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to a lot worse.
No, you've got to be thrilled the fact that they actually see you as a threat, because ignoring you says that they don't really care and that you don't have a chance. The fact that they're coming out this soon and attacking, this says that they're worried.
Right, and not only that, but they're attacking, and Paul Ryan has just stated he's refusing to have a public town hall. So it's, if your policies are that bad that you're afraid of the people you're elected to represent, that says all you need to know. You need to get a new job.
Now, both of you, both David and Randy, both of you, your mothers have illnesses, have pre-existing conditions. The Medicare, the Medicaid destruction, the attack on health care in this country, both personal to both of you, right?
Absolutely on my part.
And David,
for me, that's the reason why I got into this thing. It totally propelled me a whole different direction. I was thinking about running anyway, but I knew I had to run when my mom got sick. And, being at my age and stuff, a lot of people who are millennials, they don't think that can happen to them or that they have to make those kinds of decisions yet. But, at any given day, you can call your mom and tell her good night, or dad, brother or sister, and then the next day you're in charge of their medical decisions and keeping them alive. So, for me, it was definitely one of the major issues that got me into it.
So, Randy, obviously you're the candidate. You're the guy who's going to be pushing forward. What should healthcare look like in your view?
Well, it should involve access for everybody. I've already stated that I'd sign on to the Conyers bill. There are protections currently in place that I'm opposed to seeing taken away. Like pre-existing conditions, and there's some things that can be fixed with Obamacare. Specifically from our labor union's point of view, that we were getting charged extra because it was considered a Cadillac tax, what we did. And I don't think that people that have provided good health care should be penalized for it. So it's not perfect, but I'm in favor of moving to Medicare for all in as quick a manner as possible. And I've already stated several times I'd love to sign on and co-sponsor the Conyers bill.
Yeah, at the end of the day, to me, that seems to be where we need to go. And I've said for a while, if we have to have a system that is not Medicare for all, let the unions run the health care, because I got to be honest, as a Teamster for 20 years, I never had such good health care as when I was a working Teamster.
Right. And that's just part of, when people talk about unions and their dinosaurs, I'm like, well, is healthcare something that's outdated? Look at people now. With the leading cause of bankruptcies is due to medical bills, and unions aren't just about helping union members. It's about the entire community. It's about safe working conditions, being able to have access to healthcare, and just looking after each other. That's basically. The first Iron Workers Union was formed well over 100 years ago, and it was a group of guys that got together, and because of our high mortality rate on the job, a group of guys got together and decided to pool their money in order to provide a decent burial for one of the coworkers. It's always been about looking after each other, having each other's back, and it's not just for union members, it's for the entire community.
And I think that's important for people to remember, because you hear this a lot. Well, Randy, that was just something we needed 100 years ago. Unions, they're past their time. We don't need them anymore. But the reality is, I argue, we need them more than ever now, because you look at the fact that health insurance is going away or costing much more with people who have jobs. Pensions, a thing of the past. Safe workplaces, heading the way of a thing of the past. Actually having a job and not being an independent contractor, another thing. Today, now more than ever, in my view.
Absolutely. Since the 80s, when Ronald Reagan first went after the air traffic controllers, income inequality has it's off a cliff, horrible. There's less chance for people to move up on the ladder, and it's almost impossible for some people just to make it into the working class, to find a good job, because getting education and or skills is almost non-existent. And if not for finding the Ironworkers Union and getting into an apprenticeship that is provides training for a fantastic career at no cost to the taxpayers, I might still be working 2 full-time jobs and having 2 nickels to scrape together at the end of payday.
Yeah, I mean, again, your story is one of those that I think every working person in this country should see and understand and internalize, because we all live in that working class world. And again, if folks want to check it out, RandyBryceForCongress.com. We'll get a link at TheRickSmithShow.com. You can check out what I think is a fantastic video, and I highly suggest people looking at it, because look, it's one of those. It's telling a story, and a positive one. None of this negative attack stuff, just good stuff. RandyBryceForCongress.com. We'll make sure that happens. But here's the thing, Randy, and this is one of my hopes when David was running as well, because I need someone like a George Miller back in Congress, someone who's going to be that voice for working people, who's going to continue to push for the advancement of labor law instead of the destruction of labor law, if you understand what I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, when Act 10 was first announced in Wisconsin, I'll never forget. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was pulling up. We were building an addition at Nestle's in Burlington. It was cold, and I was told somebody, our district council president with the International called to let me know. Within 2 days, by the first Sunday after Act 10 was announced and Walker was going to drop his bomb, we had like 250 people in Horicon marching to the Speaker of the State Assembly. So it's been, we recognized these attacks as soon as they happened, and we knew it was going to be a long run. And just warning our members that, this might not affect the private sector unions yet, but trust me, it will. And it didn't take a Nostradamus to know what was coming, but look at Wisconsin now and look at the attacks on working people that have taken place since these extremists have taken power. And they're doing everything possible to stay in power because they have horrible policies. They're doing gerrymandering, which, has the representatives choosing their voters. They're doing voter suppression, and it's the worst in the state of Wisconsin in November. They're trying to get less people the ability to vote, and they're deciding who the voters are for the representatives. And when you do that, it says that you have absolutely horrible policies, and you need to be replaced.
No, I'm right there with you. But the policies, again, I think you said this earlier, and aptly so, that we bought into the message of, hey, we're going to be great jobs, we're bringing manufacturing back, we're going to do infrastructure, good trade deals, all of that, and yet we've gotten everything. But again, the website, RandyBryceForCongress.com, we'll make sure we get a link at TheRickSmithShow.com. David, let me ask you, because we want to make sure that we get good people in Congress. How can folks help Randy?
Go to his website, sign up, volunteer, of course, donate. He's going up against the Speaker of the House, and he's going to need all the help he can get with that. But just show up. Everybody needs to be out there. The resistance needs to show up. The activists, everybody needs to be in these races, not just Randy, but across the country. If everybody who is passionate about what's happening right now, actually shows up and votes and actually fights for doing the right thing, I don't see how we can lose in 2018.
Now, last bit of questioning I've got for the both of you. And David, like I said, nothing but credit to you for saying, look, it's all about taking Paul Ryan out. There are going to be a number of these contentious kind of races across the country. Any advice for folks who may be in the same kind of dynamics you guys were in? Any thoughts?
Well, I think the first thing is keep it positive, because you never know when you're going to be helping out the other person one way or another. The reason why it was so easy for Randy and I to come together is because there was no hurt feelings. We had a couple of things where we bumped each other, but we laughed about it. I think he talked about that when I got cut off the line there. But, for candidates out there who, have primary challengers, keep it positive, focus on the issues, because all anybody cares about is how is it going to affect my family. And then, if you find yourself in a position where you can help the other person for the strength of the party, do it. And do it and come together, show unity, and keep fighting together.
There you go. Randy, last question I've got for you. How can we help you? What's the ask? What can folks around the country do to help?
Well, obviously, visiting the website, if you're RandyBryceForCongress.com, if you're in the area and you can help out by knocking doors, it's going to be a people-powered race. That's how we're going to win. And it's, if not here, it's a national thing. And part of the reason I'm doing this is I'm encouraging other people, working people, who better than yourself to make decisions for us. So let's swarm them. Let's let's fill up Congress and every representative position filled with working people, because who better to make decisions than us on our behalf?
Yeah, it's absolutely what we need. We've got to take it back one way or another. Randy, I appreciate the time. David, thank you so much. I hope both of you will come back early and often as this continues down the road.
Thank you, Rick.
Great talking with you. Again, Randy Bryce for Congress.com. We'll get the link at thericksmithshow.com. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Through the door. It's desperate times, so desperate measures we explore. Marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. 3,000 people screaming out, "Where's our government?" Lawsuits and arraignments, members under company surveillance. Public divided, either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money. We worked hard for respect. Keep fighting for these rights for generations. It's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your
voice is
working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report. I'm Mark Boulanger. The labor movement is at the forefront of the struggle against the effects of climate change and progress towards green, sustainable economies. One of the labor organizations fighting for climate change solutions is Trade Unions for Energy Development. TUED is supported by Public Services International, Unison in the UK, the Canadian Labour Congress, Education International, National Nurses United in the US, and units of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Union, AFSCME. Helping to lead TUED is Sean Sweeney from the journal New Labour Forum. He spoke about the role labor unions can have in the struggles associated with climate change at a recent conference.
I'm here to talk a little bit about energy, but in the context of labour struggles. I see three tasks in front of the labour community, both here and internationally. The first is we need an independent voice on energy, climate, and environment. One that's not tied to the vision of the industries, including the renewables energy industries, or the big environmental groups, many of whom are quite agnostic on the question of worker issues. So we need an independent voice. The second thing we need is we need to turn voice into vision. It's no point saying all the time what the problems are. This is really important. We're inspired by these struggles of resistance. But we need to show how we can reach the targets that were established in Paris, and I mean the science-based targets, not the commitments made by the countries, because they're two very different things. We need to be able to turn that vision into the kind of program that can actually get the job done. All over the world, we got scientists and engineers saying, oh, we can do this. In 25 years, we could be 100% renewable power. Why is it not happening? Yes, it's the fossil fuel companies standing in the way. It's also the dynamics of growth, profit, and consumption that run through the global economy. But also, it's the belief that renewable energy has to compete on an even playing field with fossil fuels. We have to throw that idea out of the window. If the future of human civilization and all life on Earth depends on whether renewable energy is 8 cents a kilowatt hour or 10 cents a kilowatt hour, that is not an acceptable proposition, and we're not going to put up with it. I'm from the land of Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn actually was born 12 miles from where I live. He was born in a small town named Chippenham. Now, I'll just use this as an illustration. 2 years ago, the idea of public ownership, of renationalising energy, was completely on the margins of the political debate in Britain. Even among the trade unions. The unions got together and they decided they were going to push the Labour Party to support a programme of reclaiming the energy sector, which was popular amongst the British public. Privatisation had been a disaster. Those unions, with Unions for Energy Democracy, we went and met with the Labour Party just a few months ago and said, put this in the manifesto. And yes, it was in the manifesto to break up the big six cartel energy companies, to have 200 green cities pushing public renewable power. So, at the state and local level, which is where we're fighting now, there's a lot to be done, but I would caution against one or two things. First of all, it's not just about getting your state legislature to adopt a target. This is the fetish of targets. Oh, we need 50% renewables by such and such a date. Without asking the question, who will do the work? Who will do the investment? Who will own the generation capacity? Because a target that fails to answer those questions plays into the hands of the conservative forces and will not create the jobs that the green transition promises. So public renewable power, public investment, let's all rally behind it. If you're in a union, get involved, get active. Unionsforenergydemocracy.org.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Labor. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Well, it looks like that the request for all the voter data, the Trumpkins wanting, all of your, give us your social security numbers, give us your addresses, your birth date, your political, give us all of that. Well, it seems that maybe they're gonna back off. Evidently, Andrew Cossack, he is one of the designated officers on the Kobash Commission, or as I've been calling it, the KKK. He is now asking state elections officers to, quote, hold on submitting any data. I guess the pushback from, I think it was 41 states had refused to give them all or some of their data. Interesting stuff. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Michael Olesker, Talk Media News. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be here, Rick. How you doing today?
I am good. I woke up this morning to what Donald Jr. did was sleazy, but not illegal. And I'm going, that should be what's on their tombstone when this administration's done.
That's great. Sleazy, but illegal on their tombstone. Yeah. Look, I don't know if it's illegal, but it certainly has the look of it. Just to run through the pattern here a little bit. First, Donald Trump Jr. denies that he had any meetings with any Russian operatives. Then he says, oh, yeah, we just talked about Russian adoption policies. And then, when pressed by the New York Times, he says a go-between told him a Russian lawyer with ties to the Kremlin wanted to meet with him to talk about information on Hillary Clinton that might be helpful to the Trump campaign. But it's worse than that. The Times has multiple sources saying Trump Jr. was informed in an email that the information this Russian lawyer had was, quote, part of a Russian government effort to aid his father's candidacy. Now, look, the first thing he should have done was call the FBI.
Certainly.
But we have a criminal statute in this country which prohibits cooperation with any foreign nationals to influence a U.S. election, particularly, Russia.
Yeah, absolutely. But Michael, Hillary's emails.
Yeah, I know.
But
I
Hillary,
know.
but Chelsea, but Bill, but.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Look, Brett Stevens, who is a respected conservative columnist, was with the Wall Street Journal for a lot of years, is now with the New York Times, and he said, look, let's be intellectually honest about this, because we're choosing up sides along party lines in many cases. He said, if all this stuff that's coming out about the Trump camp were coming out about Hillary Clinton, the Republicans would be all over it like crazy.
Yep.
So let's not deny that, and let's understand why the Republicans are now trying to say, but Hillary, but Hillary, but Hillary. Look, if this isn't collusion, it sounds at least like attempted collusion.
Right.
If there's an email, as the Times says, in which it says this is part of a Russian government effort to aid the Trump camp, not only is it attempted collusion, it is so stupid because they've set themselves up for potential blackmail.
Yeah,
you respond to something saying the Russians want to help, all that they have to do is be there, and the Russians say, listen, we're going to release this email unless you do what we tell you we need you to do.
Exactly.
So, look, not only does he get the email, he immediately goes to Paul Manafort, who was at the time the campaign manager, and Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and key advisor. At this point in the campaign or any other time, if he hasn't got something here that looks serious, they're going to say, we're busy, but you take care of it. No, they said, great. They all went. Not only that, but I've got to ask you a question here. What is the likelihood that they went without telling Donald Trump? What's the likelihood?
I got two thoughts on that. One, that you want to give him plausible deniability. But two, the other side and the more likely side is nothing gets done without the Don knowing it.
This is beyond plausible deniability because they didn't think they were going to get caught in the first place. I find it difficult to imagine that. Don't forget, it was a small staff that they had at the time.
Right.
So I find it difficult that the three top guys around him, especially the son and son-in-law, waiting to be patted on the head like a couple of Cocker Spaniels by Dad, that they wouldn't want to tell him, hey, look at the good work we're doing.
That's a good point. I mean, because the two sons do look like that kind of a lapdogs.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Is this the smoking gun? Does this finally make us go, this is the smoking gun?
I don't know. If we know this much, I would imagine that Mueller knows a whole lot more, the special prosecutor.
No, I keep saying, imagine take what we know and then imagine everything we don't know and imagine just how bad it could actually be. That maybe there was a hotline between the Kremlin and the Trump camp that not even I thought it. I still don't think is possible, but who knows at this point.
Well, and don't forget the pattern here. We've got this established pattern of so many people around Trump. The pattern being first they deny there were any meetings with any Russians. Then when they're confronted with the specifics, they admit there was a meeting but deny anything important happened. Until that they're confronted with that. It happened with Manafort. It happened with Jared Kushner, with Jeff Sessions. Let's not forget Mike Flynn, now Trump Jr., a couple of others. If they weren't doing anything wrong, how is it that one after another starts out denying that there were any meetings at all?
Well, I mean, as my grandfather always said, you'd lie when the truth would be better. So the automatic reaction is to lie. The reflexive reaction is lie. When probably the truth would have been better had they come out, and I said this at the beginning of the show. Had Trump not made a big deal about this, had he just you've got the right to remain silent, use it. Had he just shut up about it and moved on to his agenda, we wouldn't be here.
Well, it's the old story that the cover-up is worse than the crime. Although I'm not sure that that's the case here, but we certainly have people saying that now, and we certainly have previous examples in history. Look, I mean, Bill Clinton, if he had simply said right at the start, yeah, I had a relationship with this young woman, but you know what? That's a matter between me and my wife,
right?
Not anybody else. And it would have been done instead of the Republicans pushing for unbelievable impeachment proceedings over this. So, But in this case, I think we're dealing with more than that here.
I mean, and I said this also at the beginning. Imagine the days when a stain on a blue dress was an impeachable offense. What is this? If a stain on a blue dress is something you can impeach somebody for, what level is this? Is this execution style level? I mean, are we up that high yet?
Well, I don't know, but some of these charges, treason is a pretty serious charge, and if it gets to that, I mean, if there was something going on here that that is a possibility, then that word will be put into play. Look, we don't know who's telling the truth on so many things coming out of the Trump camp. We still don't know what happened last week at this meeting between Trump and Putin. We know that Secretary of State Tillerson says the president really pushed Putin on this Russian interference with our election. But we have the Russian ambassador Lavrov saying not a single fact was produced at that meeting, and so we moved on. Well, which is the truth? We don't know, because this president refuses to have another press conference since the first one 5 months ago when he blew up. All the reports coming out of the G20 summit say that President Trump, who's trying to declare it a triumph for him, all these other reports say he was really isolated. They're working around him now. They certainly are working around him on climate. They certainly worked around him when he tried to get a general statement from all the leaders of the G20 summit condemning North Korea for their missile tests. Russia and China said, no, we're not taking part in that. Nothing happened. They certainly worked around him on this trade deal that was announced while the summit was going on, where the European Union and Japan, established this massive trade deal that is that will cover roughly 30% of the global economy, and we're not a part of it. They are working around us now. We are no longer the country in the eyes of the world that we once were only 6 months ago.
I mean, and that's really the scary part in all this. And look how short of a period it took with the kind of dysfunctional leadership we've had just already. What's another 6 months? What's another year? What's another 3.5 years going to bring us?
It's a scary proposition, and today is July 10th, 11th, 12th, something in there. So it's not even 6 months yet since January 20th.
So what's the word there on the streets? I mean, I'm sure there's something else falling. So what's at some point Republicans have got to.
They have been very reluctant to say anything against Trump. They have stood by him, and they have not been profiles in courage. And I don't think history is going to be very kind to any of them.
Like I said, at the end of the day, it's going to be sleazy but not illegal on the tombstone, and probably on the other side, illegal. I mean, because
I like your idea for the tombstone.
Sad stuff. Michael, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much for the info.
Always take care, my friend.
Always great talking to you. Michael Esker, Talk Media News. And look, at the end of it, he's right. Who do you believe? Do you believe the Russian lawyer who's now saying, well, that's not really why I was there? Do you believe Donald himself saying, hey, I went there because, hey, I wanted dirt? Because everybody does it. Interesting times. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production.
For Workers Independent News, I'm Joanne Powers. The lowest wage workers in St. Louis are getting a pay cut thanks to Republicans in the Missouri legislature. After the city passed an increase in the minimum wage to $10 an hour in 2015, the legislators passed a so-called preemption law, which prevents municipalities from setting a minimum wage any higher than that of the state. Effective August 28th, St. Louis's poorest workers will get a pay cut of 23%. The state's Republican governor, Eric Greitens, didn't sign the law, but chose to allow it to become law anyway by not attempting to veto it. Wanda Rogers, a McDonald's fast food worker involved in the fight for 15 and a union, says that workers were struggling at $7.70 an hour.
$10 an hour, it made it a little easier for us. How can you give us and then just come and snatch it back from us? McDonald's is $1 billion corporation. They can afford to pay us $15 an hour for real. We really do some hard work, and for y'all to come back and take this $10 from us, I don't think it's fair. I wonder if they can live off of $7.70 an hour. It's really going to be heartbreaking, and it's really going to hurt us for them to come back and just snatch that from under us like that. I'm not going to accept it. We're going to keep on fighting until we get what we deserve and what we work hard for.
The National Employment Law Project is calling out the so-called gig economy, app-based companies such as Uber, for contributing to racial inequality in our economy. Nayanthara Mehta of NELP says a lot of the problems facing these workers stems from misclassifying them as independent contractors.
What a lot of these gig companies are doing is saying, we're going to dictate a lot of your working life and working conditions, but we're going to call you an independent contractor. All of the things that most of us associate with the protections of having a job, that we get paid a minimum wage or are protected from discrimination, we are able to collectively organize as workers. All of these things happen if you are classified as an employee.
Independent contractors are exempt from protections of the Civil Rights Act. In addition to direct discrimination, Mehta notes biases in the customer rating systems companies such as Uber use to rate their workers.
Whether they are explicitly biased or they have the invisible but pervasive biases that we know exist in our society, they apply those biases when they're rating their drivers. And drivers of color are therefore more likely to receive lower ratings. Our biggest concerns with the gig economy reflect our concerns with the economy in general, which is that workers are exploited, and the most vulnerable workers, often workers of color and immigrant workers and low-paid workers, are especially vulnerable. It's really important for us to hold these companies accountable to make sure that these companies don't get away with replicating the inequalities and discrimination that we see too often.
To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Disorder in the house. There's a flaw in the system. And the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down.
So I go back to Sarah Huckabee Sanders and the position that the administration has taken. You look at the defense of, well, you know, it's illegal to leak information, and it's illegal to leak information about our legal activities, so it's what we did is not illegal. I mean, that's kind of what they're saying. So yesterday, you may remember that Donald Trump tweeted a story from Fox News that had claimed, well, what he tweeted out is James Comey leaked in capital letters classified information to the media. Oh, that's so illegal! Exclamation point. And, you know, couldn't wait to tweet that out. And the story yesterday, and I got a bunch of, you know, people saying, look, you know, see what Comey did was illegal. I'm going, no, those were Comey's notes. They weren't marked classified. And they went and they talked to the guy who actually had them, which was a guy who was a legal scholar. And he said there was no markings on this to say that they were classified or secret in any level. So today you got Fox and Friends who, you know, this is rare. You know, you go back through the Obama years, and I remember saying, you know, look at Fox News. It's an alternative reality. They're just making stuff up. And most people weren't paying attention. You know, most people don't watch Fox News. Understand. Fox News has way, way too much power in this country. They get about 2.5 million viewers. They get about 2.5 million viewers, which you go, that's pretty good. In a country of 310 million, sorry, it's not. It's still very small, but they get so much power because everybody else seems to cite them. You've got the President of the United States who is constantly retweeting them, constantly promoting them. It's kind of like he's got stock or something. You never see anything positive about anybody else other than Fox. And it's because, you know, they're carrying his water. They're his propaganda machine. And it's one of these things where they're just kind of walking hand in hand. They throw something out, you know, He retweets it. Yeah, I didn't collude with the Russians. It was normal. It's just kind of, we live in this weird world where I wish we would stop talking about Fox News. But the weird thing is today they came out and they admitted that they were wrong or they had mistaken. And look, they were wrong. And at the time they had to know they were wrong. Because understand, it was about a week and a half ago that Hannity started talking about, how, it's not illegal and all campaigns, they kind of do it. And just because they had a meeting, there's nothing wrong there. And that's been kind of the movement Fox has been. It's almost like the trial balloon comes out through Fox from the White House. Hey, let's try this justification for our behavior. Or let's try this justification. And of course, the Fox News minions, they're on it. I think Michael Olesker is absolutely correct. Had this been Hillary Clinton, there would be a lynch mob. There's no question about it. There would be a lynch mob ready to string her up in public square. And there would be Democrats going along as well because what they are doing is wrong. You may remember back when Bill Clinton met Loretta Lynch on the tarmac. Right from the start, I said, this has to be investigated. It's wrong. Because there are those of us who believe something is right, something is wrong. You don't do those things. You don't take meetings with Russians. You don't do it, especially when they say, hey, we've got dirt on your opponent. Because guess what? They've now got dirt on you. That's not really difficult to understand. Even if you don't use the information that they're offering, the fact that you sat in a meeting, the fact that you took that meeting, you met with that Russian lawyer, even if she had nothing to say, even if she was vague and ambiguous and didn't have anything to say, you still took the meeting. It still looks like whatever was in that email you got, and you married it whether you used it or not. That is not difficult to understand. And the thing is these guys think that they're so smart. They think they're so much more intelligent. We love the smart people. They think they're so smart that they can't get tricked, that they can't get sucked in. And I believe, maybe they weren't looking to collude with the Russians. Maybe they weren't seeking to partner up. But guess what? They got sucked into it. And I think at the end of it, this could be how this whole hook happens. Hey, we just want to win. We just want to take down that you-know-what. We're going to take down that woman. And if it means getting in bed with the Russians, so be it. I mean, honestly, it's not hard to see how this happens. It's really not. And it's interesting how this latest little tidbit has popped up. I mean, you go back and you look at all the people under investigation for having ties to the Russians. Trump himself, again, I come back to the tax returns because I think the tax returns, again, are important. Looking into who he owes money to, extremely important. And maybe finding out who he owes money to off the books, extremely important. The fact that Junior went and got himself a mob lawyer, you kind of got to wonder. So I look at this, and again, it comes back to some really interesting and bizarre moments to where, you come back to this place of what did they know, when did they know it, and what did they do? Now, as Richard Painter says, first call should have been to the FBI. That was not their first call. Now you go, well, they're not politicians. They're winners. This is how business is played. And you go, maybe so, but maybe we should be looking at how that's played as well. This win at any cost nonsense. This is how you get tangled up in these situations. And I'm not buying we're going to set up a cyber unit. I'm not buying that we're going to work together because, look, the Russian government, so much smarter than our government right now. And look, Putin will play him like a fiddle. Putin will get everything he wants out of the Donald while letting the Donald think that he's the smart guy. Do you really think Trump came up with the idea of a joint cybersecurity unit? Do you really believe that came out of his brain? I mean, honestly, do you think he went in there with hey, we're gonna partner up? Do you think that really came out of his head, or was that something that Putin planted in there? Oh my goodness. You know, it defies logic. It defies reason. It defies common sense. But sadly, it's where we are. And when we come back and talk a little bit about this most recent Pew Research Center poll that I think explains a lot of it. Again, I don't put a lot into polls, but when you start asking Americans questions and they start giving you answers, maybe you should listen. Because, again, you go back to the media culture in this country where we've siloed up. It's just amazing. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day that the American Indian movement began at a meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A group of 200 Native Americans gathered together to discuss a response to the U.S. government's history of broken treaties and the devastating consequences on Native peoples. The statistics of unyielding poverty and high unemployment in Native communities were staggering. By 1970, 40% of the Native population lived in poverty. The unemployment rate was 10 times the national average. Life expectancy was only 44 years old. In the early 1970s, activists staged a series of occupations at Alcatraz, Wounded Knee, and at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is built on a site in the Black Hills that is sacred to the Oceti-Sakowin, or the Great Sioux Nation. The United States government promised Native rights to the land in a treaty that was broken when gold was discovered. In 1972, activists staged a Trail of Broken Treaties caravan, which ended in a 6-day occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Washington, D.C. They issued a statement that read, quote, "We seek a new American majority, a majority that is not content merely to confirm itself by superiority of numbers, but which conscience is committed toward prevailing upon the public will in ceasing wrongs and doing right." Beginning in the 1970s, the United States government began to respond to Native people's demands. A series of federal acts gave Native communities more control over their education and improving their health care. Lawsuits brought by tribes resulted in further economic autonomy. Yet by 2014, 1 in 4 Native people still lived in poverty. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
So, we won the evangelicals, we won with young, we won with old, we won with highly educated, we won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated. We're the smartest people. We're the most loyal people.
Way to the end of the world. Way to the end of the world. Way to the end of the world.
Ah, yes. Love the poorly educated. Love me some stupid people. I play that. And look, it came from during the election, but it's really it's amazing. I love stupid people. Bring on the poorly educated, because those are the people who voted for him. And it's not surprising when you look at the most recent Pew Research Center poll that found, and this just, while I know I should not be surprised, I know this is one of those things that I already know. I don't need a poll to tell me, but I'm still shocked. There's still part of me that goes, I don't believe it. Even though I know it. You ever have that where you know something and you still can't believe that it's real? This is one of those things. And I'm just going to read directly from the Reuters report. The Pew Research Center poll finds 58% of Republicans and Republican-leading independents think colleges and universities hurt the country. Let that sink in for a minute. 58% of the people polled, and the thing is, I actually would have thought it'd been a little bit higher. 58% of Republicans and Republican-leading independents think higher education is hurting the country. We're too smart. All that book learning, bad for the kids. Makes them think, gives them ideas. Just 36% of Republicans think higher education has a positive effect on the country. Flip that around to the other side. You've got 72% of Democrats who say that colleges have a positive effect on the country. Overall, slightly more than half of the country, 55%, believe that colleges and universities help the country. And you look at the divide between Republicans and Democrats, and it's pretty amazing. On the issue of the national news media, 44% of Democrats think the national news is positive, while you have just 10% of Republicans who think the national news is positive for the country. The fact that we find out what our elected officials are doing. 85% of Republicans think the media is hurting the country. Stop and think about that for a minute. Combine that with the fact that they don't believe in higher education, that higher education hurts the country, and that information about our government, about our society is hurting the country. I mean, think of your average low information, knuckle dragging, mouth breathing voter who would vote for Donald Trump. This is right in line. And again, nothing that you don't already know. Nothing that should surprise, nothing that should shock, nothing that should make you even question it. Yet there's part of me that goes, really? In the 21st century, we're still having conversations they didn't have in the 19th or 20th century, when we believed that every generation should go on and get a higher education than their parents got, and they should be smarter and better informed and better skilled. What the heck happened? How does this happen? Well, it happens because you've got a presidential candidate and a political party that has been attacking education for a couple of generations now. I mean, they've been going after public schools to try and divide and destroy for since the 70s. And it's all about those teachers who we could replace with anybody. We could get anybody to teach. That's what they think. So is there any surprise here? Now, the other part of it that caught my attention is 59% of Democrats think labor unions have a positive effect on the country. 59%. That's pathetic. I'm not surprised that only a third of Republicans feel that unions have a positive effect, because they're the ones who are trying to break it. But when you have only 59% of the Democrats who think that labor unions are good for the country, there's something seriously wrong. And the reason that there were people voting for Donald Trump in the last election, because too many Democrats have walked away from workers. It used to be one of those things, and I go back to conversations I had with my grandfather who was very clear that you needed to have an organization at the workplace, you needed to have representation, you needed to have a contract, you needed to have that voice, that power, that say, if you were going to make a decent living. And since it's been destroyed, and as we've seen labor unions just decimated, wages have actually fallen. And I look at the trucking industry where I came out of. When I first started, I was making more money back, almost 30 years ago, more than I make now. With the best healthcare money could buy, a defined benefit pension fund, 8 hours show up time, whether you worked 5 minutes or you didn't work at all, vacation, healthcare, pensions, all of that stuff. And what happened? Well, thanks Ronald Reagan for attacking the Patco workers, for the shot heard across the boardroom that sent corporate America out with their muskets, their legislators, their lobbyists, and, well, you have the destruction of labor in this country. And with it, a prosperous middle class, a prosperous working class, the ability for one earner to support a family, a thing of the past. And why? Well, so we could create the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization. And I look at this dumbing down of our country. And it's really what it is. It's this massive dumbing down because, we don't want people smart enough to understand how bad we're being screwed over. And you go back to the George Carlin clip of, they want people just smart enough to shuffle the papers and push the buttons, but not smart enough to ask why. And it's a perfect statement. They want us to do their manual labor, to clean up after their mess, and to fund their banks when they go under, but not smart enough to ask why. To go off and die in their wars, but go, wait a second, what about diplomacy? And to expand on that for a second, you look at North Korea. We're rattling the sabers in North Korea, and look, there's got to be a diplomatic solution to this, and China's got to be part of it. But it's interesting what just came out yesterday from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Their spokesman said it wasn't China ratcheting up tension in North Korea, and that the key to resolution didn't lie with China and Beijing. He said, quote, recently, certain people talking about the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue have been exaggerating and giving prominence to the so-called China responsibility theory. He went on to say, I think that either shows a lack of full, correct knowledge of the issue or ulterior motives for it, trying to shift responsibility. He goes on to say, asking others to do work but doing nothing themselves is not okay. Being stabbed in the back is really not okay. And what you've got is you've got the Chinese who are now becoming really the leader of the world for the next century. Because we've fallen down. We haven't just fallen down. We've tripped ourselves, and while running with scissors. And what you've got is now the Chinese in the driver's seat almost, because they're saying, well, you know what? The reason that what's going on in North Korea is because you U.S. and you South Korea keep doing joint military operations, and the North Koreans don't like it. And you go, who else doesn't like it? Oh, yeah, the Chinese. And, oh, you're going to put a missile defense system into South Korea. Who doesn't like that? The North Koreans. You know who else doesn't like it? The Chinese. I mean, we're being outplayed at every single turn. All while we're thumping our chests. And today, Trump tweets out, big win with ISIS. You go, it's not a game, you dimwit. And all this chest thumping and all this, we're number one and make America great again. All of this stuff is not making us any safer, any better in the world standing. In fact, what it's doing is it's turning the world against us. And as we talked about yesterday, the rest of the world's moving on, even if we're not. And free trade being part of that. And look, I'm not a free trader. I believe we have to trade. I'm not an isolationist, but I do believe in protectionism. And as I've said a million times, I don't have a giant moat around my house, but I do lock the door when I leave. You've got to have smart trade. And when we come back and talk a little bit about what does that look like? Is the Donald leading us in the right direction on the trade issue? Is he leading us in any direction? Or is it just insane, bizarre ramblings of a lunatic who has not a clue what he's talking about, but loves the stupid people? And guess what? They love him back. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
I'll never bend. I'm with you now until the end.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with a heart. The voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1892. Striking silver miners in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, blew up the Frisco Mill. The miners were upset because the company had hired Pinkerton guards to infiltrate the mine. Working conditions in the northern Idaho mining district were terrible at that time. Many workers were injured, and some died because of lack of mine safety. When mine owners wanted to purchase new equipment, they cut costs by increasing working hours and decreasing miners' pay. In response, the miners decided to strike. The mine owners, unsurprisingly, brought in scabs. Some scabs were persuaded to honor the strike. The mine owners also hired Pinkertons to infiltrate the ranks of the strikers. One Pinkerton, Charlie Sharingo, was so successful at gaining the confidence of the strikers that he became the union's recording secretary. The infiltrator had access to the union's financial records and relayed all information he uncovered to the mine owners. By early July, Union miners suspected Sharingo was a spy. The miners became more militant, and in the very early hours, miners gathered to stop a trainload of scabs from entering the mine. Pinkerton guards were brought in to protect the incoming scabs. A shootout between the guards and the miners erupted. It was unclear who shot first, but the miners retaliated by dropping a box of powder down a flume in the Frisco Mill. The box exploded, and one company employee was killed. A battle broke out at a nearby mine, and 3 miners were killed before owners surrendered. 3 mines fell into the hands of the workers by that evening. The governor of Idaho declared martial law and sent in the Idaho National Guard to break the Union. These events helped to lead to the creation of the Western Federation of Miners. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
You don't have to be in who's who to know what's what. For example, if a tiny group of Wall Street bankers, billionaires, and their political puppets are allowed to write the rules that govern our economy and elections, guess what? Only bankers, billionaires, and puppets will profit from those rules. That's exactly why our land of opportunity has become today's land of inequality. Corporate elites have bought their way into the policy-making backrooms of Washington, where they've rigged the rules to let them feast freely on our jobs, devour our country's wealth, and impoverish the middle class. There's good news, however. A growing grassroots coalition of churches, unions, civil rights groups, citizen activists, and many others is organizing and mobilizing us to crash through those closed doors, write our own rules, and reverse America's plunge into plutocracy. Called Take on Wall Street, the coalition's structural reforms include getting the corrupting cash of corporations and the super-rich out of our politics by repealing Citizens United and providing a public system for financing America's elections, stopping too-big-to-fail banks from subsidizing their high-risk speculative gambling with the deposits of us ordinary customers, making them choose to be a consumer bank or a casino, but not both. Instituting a tiny Robin Hood tax on Wall Street speculators to discourage their computerized gaming of the system, while also generating hundreds of billions of tax dollars to invest in America's real economy. Restoring low-cost, convenient postal banking in our post offices to serve millions of Americans who are now at the mercy of predatory payday lenders and check-cashing chains. This is Jim Hightower saying, to learn more about this campaign and its reform agenda to democratize America's financial system, go to www.takeonwallstreet.org. Takeonwallstreet.org.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So I remember, and I actually remember it like it was yesterday, July 27th, 2005. The U.S. House of Representatives, like thieves in the night, passed the Central American Free Trade Agreement, or CAFTA. And I remember, passed by one vote. It was a 217 to 215 vote, 2 no votes. You had 15 Democrats who went along with 202 Republicans to pass this monstrosity through. And look, at the time we said we're going to lose jobs over this. But more importantly, this is just going to be that free fall to the bottom of the barrel with working conditions. And what we've seen over the years is, as predicted, working conditions are horrible. You have the assassination of union leaders. You have the firing of people, the constant intimidation, all of this, and not surprising. But we were told this agreement was different. We were going to have strong environmental and labor protections. Well, here to talk about how that's been working out, I've asked our good friend Celeste Drake. She is the AFL-CIO's Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist. Celeste, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me, Rick. Good to be here.
So I was told, and maybe you can help me with this, I was told strong labor and environmental, it was there. The chapters were there. We're going to protect workers all across the world. How's that working out for us?
Not so well. And this is the problem. We keep hearing the same rhetoric, whether it was in the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, in the CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, in the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has fallen apart and the U.S. has withdrawn from. It's the same rhetoric. Strong, enforceable protections. They're going to create a level playing field. They're going to help workers. But those are talking points. The reality is you have to look. This is a contract. A trade agreement is a contract between countries. You have to look at the provisions. And those provisions they're a front. They're a sales pitch. They're an advertising slogan that allows somebody to say strong, enforceable labor protections to create a level playing field. And what they are a series of obstacles that actually say they're protecting labor rights, but really make it pretty clear that it's going to be nearly impossible to ever bring an effective case and address true labor abuses and exploitation, whether it's in the U.S. or in one of the countries that we trade with.
Right. And again, you keep hearing about, well, you can go to the tribunal, or you could go to these panels and you can have your cases heard. You go, but who's going to bring them out? And a lot of this stuff, you see the steel workers bringing trade cases and enforcement cases, but who's going to stand up for the rights of these workers? I mean, how many, the unions in these countries are generally under attack. And I remember the push for the Colombian Free Trade Agreement. I'm going, a country where they literally take unionists up in planes and throw them out. These are the folks that we're gonna have a trade agreement with?
Absolutely. And listeners might be interested to know that each year, for the past decade or so, Guatemala and Colombia have been vying for the title of the most dangerous place in the world to be a trade unionist. Their per capita assassination of trade unionists for trade union activity, either one of them is at the top. And 83 trade unionists have been murdered and assassinated for their labor work since CAFTA took effect. And, as you said, it's really not that long ago. It's been about a decade that CAFTA has been in effect, and there's been 83 trade unionists murdered. Unfortunately, just to show you how weak these provisions are, the U.S. government, which is the entity that has to bring the case on behalf of workers, to answer your question, told us that the murder of trade unionists is not a violation of the labor chapter in CAFTA. So it wasn't even addressed in the case that we lost.
So hold on, stop. Let me get this straight. I can't fire you. I can't intimidate you on the job. I can just kill you? That's
Yes,
okay? I can't.
That's okay.
All right. And we agreed to this?
Well, we didn't agree, right? But Congress agreed. The negotiators between the governments agreed, and then Congress agreed. And part of that is, the fast-track implementation procedure where members of Congress can't say, wait, hold on a minute, stop. I'd like to trade more with Guatemala, but not under these terms. Let's fix it. They only have an opportunity to say yes or no, and in the highly charged environment that is Washington, D.C., they tend to say yes, and that's a problem with fast track. But, yeah, that's what shows you that these labor provisions, they aren't real. They're a fig leaf to provide those who want to vote for these trade agreements some cover that, look, they've strengthened the labor provisions. And certainly from NAFTA to CAFTA, they brought the chapter into the full text of the agreement. And they made the process not quite so convoluted as what you had to go through if you were going to bring a case in NAFTA, which never got to this point of creating a panel. But they also have no mandatory timelines, no mandatory enforceability. So countries can say maybe they want to enforce the labor chapter, maybe they don't. Maybe they want to act like they're going to enforce the labor chapter and then just let complaints sit forever because there's no requirement to move them. And in the end, it gets back to your question about who's doing the work here. CAFTA contains an investment chapter that has a provision called Investor to State Dispute Settlement, ISDS. Your trade activist listeners will be familiar with ISDS. That's where a foreign investor who invests under CAFTA, who thinks that its rights have been violated, can bring a case directly. It can go to Guatemala and say, hey, Guatemala, I'm just an investor here, but I'm going to take you to an international tribunal, and I'm going to accuse you of having violated my property rights, and we'll see who wins. Workers do not have the same right. We have to petition one of the governments in the agreement to go after another government in the agreement. And the weakness there is they can say no. And in Guatemala, they said yes, but it took them 9 years plus, and they lost. And it wasn't a great example of the U.S. really saying to Guatemala, get your affairs in order, enforce your labor laws, protect your workers, make sure that workers can organize, because that's not what happened.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this then, because, I'm sure there are people, well, it's just Guatemala. Why do we care about Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador or Colombia or Costa Rica? Why do we care about any of those places?
Well, for one reason, right, it's the right thing to do. It's the U.S. government claims to be a moral actor in the world and to protect human rights violations against the vulnerable. That's what's happening. But, in the context of the trade agreement, and this is where it really is relevant, if we're bringing in goods from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, whatever it is, and these goods are made under exploitive conditions, unsafe, wage theft, denial of union rights, denial of bargaining, in a fair manner, firing, killing, threatening workers for trying to join a union. That means that we in the U.S., even if we're not being assassinated for trade union activity, or even if we personally are not the victims of wage theft, all of those things that are happening in Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador, they impact the wages that we can command on our jobs. So as workers are exploited elsewhere, it means we in the U.S. are going to be paid less. We are more likely going to be exploited. It's going to be harder to form a union and bargain with our employers here. We're all sort of one big labor market. And the really interesting thing is that it's pretty hard for workers to move across borders for work, although it happens, but it's impossible for us to bargain across borders and set those workplace standards across borders. But the employers, they have it really easy. They can move and invest and either hire factories through contracting out or build their own factories wherever they want. And they do it. And they do it in ways that exploit workers and play this game of arbitrage by essentially telling workers, if you don't take a pay cut, if you don't take your wage theft and shut up, if you don't take this anti-union intimidation and shut up, that's all fine. But we're going to close down this factory and rebuild elsewhere where we can exploit workers even more. And also, by the way, probably pay lower taxes and exploit the environment even more. So it's all a game that's to the advantage of the corporations. And the problem is it doesn't have to be this way. We can easily change that by setting up a different set of international trade rules. But our current trade agreements, NAFTA, CAFTA, U.S., Colombia, all of these, they set it up exactly that way. Benefits to corporations and really allowing exploitation for workers.
No, but I've been saying for years the whole neoliberal trade agenda has been set up in a way that, as you've pointed out, that benefits investors and that harms workers at every turn. So I go back to 2016 when Donald Trump's running around saying we're going to renegotiate all this stuff. He didn't mention labor at all in it, but I think a lot of people thought maybe that was part of it. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I think a lot of people thought it was part in it. And hey, here was somebody saying what a lot of workers had been feeling. You've been screwed by rigged trade agreements. He said that. And people said, wait a minute, somebody's finally saying it. They're not messing around by saying, oh, trade is great if we just give you better trade adjustment assistance, or trade's not really bad. It's really the robots that are taking your jobs. He spoke to what a lot of folks felt. Now, the proof will be in the pudding. The NAFTA has currently been noticed for renegotiation. We expect the administration to publish its specific trade negotiating suggestions next week on July 17th, and we will see what is in there. And if it's not strong enforced labor provisions with timelines and mandatory enforcement, if it's not getting rid of ISDS, if it's not strengthening rules of origin and getting rid of rules that undercut Buy American policies, and if it's not rules that make sure you have to protect the environment, if it's not rules that prevent this race to the bottom in taxes and disinvestment in our own infrastructure, if it's not that, then we know that all that other stuff about trade and was really just another slogan to get elected. And so what this administration puts on the table in NAFTA is really going to matter, and everyone should really pay attention.
Yeah, is there any hope? I mean, honestly and truthfully, I mean, I look at what the Trump administration has done with their Department of Labor so far, and some of just the turning back of of overtime, the gutting of safety precautions and regulations. I mean, is there any hope of actually seeing something positive on the labor front coming out of any renegotiation with NAFTA?
Well, you're exactly right about the new Secretary of Labor and the things coming out of the Labor Department, that it doesn't lead one to be hopeful. I never want to prejudge, but we will say folks should watch. I mean, this administration is so mercurial. It's so unique in that it has this Wall Street wing that wants to do the same old corporate neoliberal, 1% policy, and get away with that. And then there's sort of the proto-fascist, xenophobic, hateful group. And then there seems to be a few folks that, don't fit into either camp and maybe want to do something positive on trade. Will they carry the day? It remains to be seen. But in terms of, what this administration has done so far with rolling back worker protections, folks shouldn't be wildly optimistic, shall we say.
Yeah, because here's the thing. I mean, with all of this talk, I don't know if you saw during the G20 that, there was talk coming out of that China's taking the lead on free trade, while we're, the message has been that, we're now we're protectionists now, which I disagree with. But, now China is going to be the leader in carrying the free trade mantle. And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, if the U.S. is protectionist, what are we protecting? We clearly have not been doing a great job of protecting U.S. workers or their wages or their benefits or anything of that nature. Protectionism has come to be kind of a silly word that the neoliberals throw at anybody who wants a different trade policy than what they're selling. It doesn't have a lot of substance to it. And, with China leading the so-called free trade, again, what does free trade mean? China doesn't trade freely or fairly. It violates the rules of the World Trade Organization pretty consistently. It engages in illegal subsidization. It has engaged in targeted currency manipulation. It doesn't allow its workers to organize and bargain freely. So it's got all kinds of problems that we would say, well, that's neither free nor fair trade. The problem with, the G20 and some of these other international institutions is that they're subject to the same sort of corporate power dynamics as the U.S. economy is right now. And they've almost focused on free trade to the exclusion of all other international economic policies that could actually do a lot more to build growth with equity and shared prosperity and really drive development in a positive way. So where are there discussions about investment in infrastructure? Where are there discussions about doing something serious about tax havens and making sure that countries collect enough tax to go back and invest in their children and invest in their workers and invest in their housing stock and their clean water and on all of these things? So there's too much focus on trade and let's have another new agreement, and too little focus on, wait a minute, let's step back and look at what's happening in our economies and figure out how we can create the rules so that working people benefit rather than taking all the risk. Right now, when there's a new trade agreement, who bears the sole risk of what if wages go down and what if I lose my job? It's the worker. Yep. And that's a bad model.
I'm right there with you. And the hope is that eventually we come around as a nation to that idea and push in the right direction. Is there any open comment period or anything where people can chime in on this stuff?
The comment period on NAFTA specifically is closed, but there's a new comment period that folks can talk about how trade has hurt them and how the lack of good trade enforcement has specifically hurt them. And if they go to the Federal Register and do a search for USTR and trade enforcement, they can give the administration an earful of exactly what they're thinking.
Well, we will make sure that we look that up and get some of those so people can participate and get their voices heard. Celeste, I appreciate the input, the thoughts. I'm not hopeful, but maybe there's a possibility that we turn this thing around. Celeste, I appreciate the time.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Always great talking with you. Celeste Drake. She's the head honcho there at the Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist with the AFL-CIO. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. The Little Steel Strike was beginning to collapse. Strikers in Massillon, Ohio had gathered that Sunday night at Union headquarters across from Republic Steel's Massillon Works. As Ahmed White describes in his book The Last Great Strike, the union had organized weekly festivities on Sunday nights, including food, live music, and dancing. For weeks, the Law and Order League had repeatedly demanded special police be deputized and armed to crush the strike. By early July, Ohio National Guardsmen ensured the forcible reopening of the mill. One self-appointed special deputy leader, Major Curley, decided tonight would be the night he was going to, quote, clean out that goddamned hall. He provocatively positioned his deputies in front of Union headquarters. First, he ordered his deputies to fire on picketers attempting to block the gate at shift change. When strikers hurled bottles and rocks in response, the deputies unleashed massive rounds of gunfire and tear gas for more than half an hour. Guardsmen, railroad, and company police joined in the anti-SWAT siege. 2 strikers were dead. Nick Valdos was shot in the hip as he attempted to aid wounded strikers. Fulgencio Calzera was shot in the back of the head in front of Union headquarters. Another 7 strikers were shot and seriously wounded. At least 4 more were hospitalized with injuries. Police forces ransacked the hall, seizing Union records and membership lists. They continued their rampage through the neighborhood, ransacking homes and arresting anyone suspected of having ties to the Union. As many as 165 were arrested and held for several days. As White notes, the NLRB and the La Follette Commission both concluded that blame for the evening's violence lay with Republic.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. To no one's surprise, the biggest story coming out of President Trump's visit to the G7 meetings in Germany was his long sit-down with Russian President Vladimir Putin. But much more happened at the 2-day meeting than that, including the announcement that the U.S. will send more than $600 million to deal with a famine that's raging in 4 countries in Africa and on the Arabian Peninsula. Conflict and drought have made the situation dire in Somalia, South Sudan, Nigeria, and Yemen, and the U.S. had already set aside more than $1 billion to help an estimated 30 million people there desperately in need of food assistance. The new tranche of $629 million will be dispensed by USAID, not through donations to the United Nations. And Ukraine has long desired NATO membership, but the idea, sure to enrage Russia, was long unpopular in the country. That part has changed, and NATO membership is now viewed as one of Ukraine's top political priorities as the country grapples with the loss of Crimea and the occupation of eastern provinces by Russian-backed militias. On Monday, Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko set a 2020 target date for the completion of reforms that could make it possible for Ukraine to join the NATO alliance. According to NATO officials, much of Ukraine's work would need to focus on tough new anti-corruption measures as well as law enforcement and defense reform. Predictably, Russian officials didn't hesitate to express their displeasure with Ukraine's announcement. Presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that, quote, "For many years, Russia has been voicing concern over NATO moving its military infrastructure facilities closer to our borders. Ukraine joining NATO," he said, "could be another step in that direction, so it will not help strengthen stability and security in Europe." For more global news headlines, visit talkmedianews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
People all over this world are getting organized and bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. So, you look at some of our trade deals, and, look, where Trump found the kernel is that our trade deals suck for working people. Now, if you're Trump, trade deals are great for his class. A place where investors can go and sue a country because they passed a law that might hurt their ability to make more money, like child labor laws, or, a country saying we don't want teenagers smoking, or, we don't want dolphin in our tuna, or we don't want to bury hazardous waste, or you can go down the list of all of the things that the U.S. has been sued for over the years by investors in other countries. And you go, for them, that's fine. For workers, good luck. Good luck. And, I've talked with Colombian workers, had them on the program where they talk about the working conditions in that country as not just deplorable and dangerous, but daily life-threatening. To where in this country, they bring you into a captive meeting and they say, well, the union just wants your money and they're not going to do anything for you and they're just bad and they're evil and we don't like them and blah, blah, blah. Where in these countries, they put a gun to your head and say, if you vote for a union, we're going to blow your freaking head off. These are the people that we're dealing with. where they literally pull people off of buses and shoot them in the street in front of their coworkers. This is not made up. This is reality, where they pull people onto airplanes and throw them out of planes. This is not made up. This is the reality of being a trade unionist in a lot of countries that we have quote-unquote free trade deals with. And here's the thing. For average, everyday working people, these trade agreements are they're terrible. They're horrible on every front. And they're bad for the country. Our trade deficit has skyrocketed because of these bad deals. Because of this corporate mentality. And look, I can't tell you how much flack I've taken over the years for saying that I don't agree with the neoliberal trade agenda, that I don't like neoliberals. I don't like elitist Wall Street DLC types. And from people who I thought would know better. I remember going and trying to get someone to sponsor this program and saying, look, I'm not in favor of these neoliberal policies. And the guy looked at me and go, you better be quiet about that because a lot of our friends are neoliberals. I go, maybe they're your friends, but they're killing me. They're killing the working class of this country with these insane trade deals, with all of this privatization and all of this handing stuff over to the investor and the wealth class, and then making sure that there's legislation that the risk is gone. And Public Citizen has a little document out that points out that growth of U.S. exports to free trade partners has been 29% lower than exports with the rest of the world over the last decade. So the countries we have free trade agreements with. Now remember, the free trade agreements, we're going to be able to sell back and forth. It's going to be great. Actually 29% less than with the countries that we don't have free trade agreements with. And guess what? Our trade deficits with those countries that we have these free trade agreements with is 5 times higher than it was before the deal took effect. So we have free trade agreements, and they just balloon our deficits, which means, in layman's terms, we buy more of their stuff than they buy of ours. That means that what happens, and understand what happens, and a good friend of mine, Dr. Richard Levin said, these trade agreements are about we buy cheap toasters and they get our jobs. It's about trading jobs for cheap crap. So all of those things that we used to buy when we were kids that were made, down the street or across the state or across the country, toys, bikes, you name it, all being made somewhere else that we're still buying, but they're made somewhere else. That has just ballooned our deficit. And they say we've lost almost 800,000 jobs because of it. Imagine what we could do with 800,000 more productive jobs and what that would mean in a reverberation effect in more jobs. Considering, because they say for every manufacturing job, it supports 7 non-manufacturing jobs. That's important stuff. And this is where Trump found the kernel. The question is, what's he going to do about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Tell us what you think of the free trade agreements. Is there anything we can do? Will the Donald and his administration do anything, or is it just going to be more corporate handouts? I personally think the handouts, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of the program, thericksmithshow.com is where you get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tidal flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial